from Carmel, California. I am talking to you from my hometown and the bedroom in which I spent my childhood. I want you to imagine it is February 2003. I am visiting my parents and staying in this very room during the winter holidays. And it's 5 a.m. and I get a phone call. It is my classmate from Oxford University who has since gone on to graduate and has a job with CNN, the CNN branch in London. And while I was sleeping, he has called me to tell me that the news is going crazy about you. All the newspapers, your frontline material, all the TV, the 5 o'clock news is talking about you. What have I done? Well, you have to imagine, in September 2002, I wrote an article that was really just chapter 2 of my thesis that I published on an online journal about Iraq's intelligence and security agencies. It was the topic of my thesis, and even though I began the thesis in the year 2000, I could have never imagined that by 2003, a war is going to be waged against my native Iraq. Chapter 2 of my thesis, which was published online, somehow made it into the British government's latest intelligence dossier. How did that happen? Well, a British academic who had read my article and then read in September 2002, and then read the British intelligence dossier that was made public in February 2003, noticed similarities in the language between my document and the British intelligence document. But what helped this British academic detect that I had in fact been plagiarized? Even as a PhD student, I saved things to the last minute. And when I submitted my article, I had a misplaced comma in my article. The British government not only copied my information, but even my grammatical mistakes, including the misplaced comma. That gave, beyond any doubt, the evidence to this British academic that I had been plagiarized. And he informed the British media. While I slept, the British media was breaking this news story. The British government had copied an article from a PhD student and tried to depict this as the latest intelligence from the British government. What are the odds of getting a call at 5 a.m.? I am sleeping in my childhood bed, which is, I've outgrown it. I have to sleep at a diagonal to just fit in it. And my friend in London is saying, can you talk in 10 minutes to CNN London about how you feel about this? I pause and I just look at the ceiling where I have these model airplanes that I used to construct as a kid. And it's surreal. Here I am now at the, really at the front of an international relations scandals. And I am still feeling like I'm that 10-year-old child who just wants to go and make toy airplanes. So what happened next? The Iraq War happened. Now, you see, there was no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. And really the plagiarism of my article should have been really kind of a wake-up call that if they're plagiarizing my information, which was really about the 1991 Gulf War, and you recycling that information for the 2003 Iraq War, that there's something faulty in the British and American justifications for the invasion of Iraq. Nonetheless, the war happened and no weapons of mass destruction were found. I returned to Oxford in May 2003, after the war had finished, I got a letter in the mail. Imagine you're going through the mail, junk mail, going through it, and then you see a letter with the stamp of the British Parliament. I opened it, and what are they asking me? They are asking me to testify. There is an inquiry being launched as to how the British government misled the public prior to the invasion of Iraq, and they're asking me to testify. So one beautiful May afternoon, I get onto a train. I leave 2 hours because, you never, what good excuse do you have for being late to Parliament? I get into a train and I'm off to the British Parliament. The train ride is normally less than an hour. 20 minutes into the train ride, the train stops in the middle of the British countryside, outside of Reading. And for no reason, it just stops. And I said, okay, whatever. The British train system is notoriously unreliable. I thought it was just, your regular delay. Then 10 minutes pass, 15 minutes pass, and the passenger sitting around me, we start to talk. What are we being delayed from? A businessman sitting next to me says, I have a business meeting. The woman sitting in front of me says, I was hoping to go shopping in London, in Oxford Circus. And then they look at me and I say, I am late for a testimony in front of the British Parliament. The businessman next to me folds his newspaper, points to me in that newspaper and says, oh, I'm reading about you right now. I'm reading about your testimony. And here you are sitting next to me. Then an announcement comes on and says, we're sorry for the delay, but apparently there has been a train explosion. I'm sorry, an explosion on the train tracks, and we can't proceed any further. The woman sitting in front of me starts to joke and saying, it's your fault. Somebody wants to delay your testimony. I called the Parliament, the secretary who arranged my testimony, and I told her literally that I can't make it today. There's an explosion. And she made a joke that, Tony Blair must be behind it. She says, can you get out of the train and just take a taxi to London? I say, no, I'm stuck in the British countryside. I cannot. She goes, okay, just let us know the details. The woman sitting in front of me was quite attractive, actually. And you know what? I didn't mind the delay. I really didn't mind the delay, but I had this worrying scenario. After she made the joke and the woman of the Parliament made the joke, I had this image of a black helicopter at that moment swooping down from the sky, landing on top of my train car. And who comes out but James Bond? Takes out his pistol, he puts a silencer, breaks into my train car, walks up to me, shoots me in the forehead with his gun, like that. And then, of course, what does he do? He takes the attractive woman, and then you know what James Bond is famous for, and then boom, 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 the James Bond film starts. This is what I was imagining. The train announcer finally says, we have to go back to Oxford. This train cannot go into London. The train pulls into Oxford. I jump out and I get into the first taxi cab I see, and I tell the taxi driver, can you take me to Parliament? He looks back to me, I mean, he probably thinks, stupid American tourist, and says, sorry, there is no Parliament in Oxford. And I was like, yeah, I know. I want you to take me to the Parliament in London, the one with the Big Ben. I didn't even have the address of Parliament. I just said, go to Big Ben. He goes, do you know how much it'll cost to go to Parliament? And I was like, no, do you? And he goes, no one has ever asked me this. But anyway, he goes and he's off. And while he is driving, he is just loving the fact that he's taking somebody to testify in Parliament. He is on the phone talking to a significant other who's saying, you can't imagine who I have in the back of my seat. We finally pull up to the Parliament. The woman who arranged my testimony has a bag of money that I think she just collected from every parliamentarian to chip in for my taxi fare, which came out to around £260. And I finally get into the Parliament and I make my deposition. That was anticlimactic, but I just had to say on the record, I was plagiarized. I did not give this information to the British government willingly. That ended the first episode. Years later, I see my story made into a film starring James Gandolfini of The Sopranos fame. And who played me? Now, they were joking. Leonardo DiCaprio did not play me. I was played by an actress named Anna Chomsky. So I don't know what happened. Maybe I sounded so whiny when I used to give my media interviews. They said, "Oh, let's make him into kind of a catty woman," because that's who the actress they found to play me. Maybe they just didn't want to pay me royalties, but I was, yeah, they chose a woman, my least favorite actress actually, to play me. Then I moved to Turkey, where I had my first academic position. Imagine this. What are the odds? You're giving class, and that should be kind of a harrowing experience already. But why is this particular class a bit worrying? Imagine you're walking into class and you decided to have a coffee before class starts. And you see a newspaper, somebody reading a newspaper before you're going to work, and the face looks familiar, and you look closely. Who is on the front page of the newspaper? Well, it was me. But what did the front page of the Turkish newspaper say? Now you have to imagine this was maybe a year after the plagiarism. It said the man who started the Iraq War has just moved to Istanbul. The way the Turkish media kind of construed my story was I was the architect of the Iraq War. In other words, the information I collected and researched was deliberately designed to justify and started a war against my native Iraq. I thought, okay, maybe not that many people read the newspapers. I get into the taxi on the way to work. And what does the taxi driver say? Why did you start the Iraq War? I begin my class, and what happens? I hear voices outside, and it's protesters. Protesters who have organizing saying, we don't want the architect of the Iraq War at our university. What happened? This went on for my entire career in Turkey, where I was dogged as the architect of the Iraq War. It made my life unbearable. And even though I loved Turkey, I decided I have to move and I had to look for a new job. And where did I find a job announcement? Well, at a brand new university called IE University. I didn't know much about Spain. I didn't know much about this university. I didn't even know if this university would ever take off. But I took a risk and decided to apply there. How was my first year at IE University? I hated it. I was stressed. I didn't know this university would take off. But after the first year, I fell in love with Spain. And I fell in love with that university. It was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to me because here I am in the year 2020, and I'm still finding a reason to come back to Spain every year and lecture at this university. What's the lesson behind my experience? Well, the first lesson is this: learn how to use your commas. Because there is a book called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. I highly recommend you purchase it. And in the final page of Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, what is the final lesson about why you should learn how to use the commas? Because the author, Lynne Truss, says, remember the case of Ibrahim Al-Marash and how his misplaced comma gave away that the British government plagiarized him. That should be the ultimate lesson on how to use a comma and the importance of commas and punctuation. Okay, you might ask, how many people have read this book? It has sold more than 1 million copies, okay? In other words, more than 1 million people know that I cannot use commas. Anyway, I did learn how to use commas, but what's the other takeaway from this? Unfortunately, this entire TED experience is because we are all had gone through the experience of quarantine. None of us can meet face to face as a result of this. Many of us have endured mental health trauma as a result of the quarantine. Some of us may have even lost loved ones. I personally did lose relatives in Iran due to the coronavirus. And what is the takeaway of this global traumatic experience? Well, let's think of the Black Death. There would have been no Italian Renaissance without the Black Death that ravaged Europe, as well as the world. And I want you to think about this. If we owe the Renaissance to the Black Death, I want you, all of you who are listening right now, to think, what Renaissance will you contribute to once this COVID-19 pandemic is over? What Renaissance will you contribute to? And for anyone watching this now, I want you to think, out of that Renaissance, that perhaps you will be giving your own TED Talk based on your silver lining, whether it's now, in a year, or in a couple of years from now. Thank you so much.